Alright, now I know everyone who watches this show also watches my weekly film reviews on Escape to the Movies, right? Because, it'd be silly not to. They're right here on the same site. Seems like you'd have to go out of your way to not know about that. Anyway, if you missed it a week or two ago, I really liked Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Shit, guys, this movie is so goddamn good. It's awesome! So awesome! It's so awesome! So awesome!
Godzilla's all like, and King Ghidorah's all like, and they're like,
Which it turns out is an opinion that actually puts me in the minority of professional film critics, who by the numbers were mostly lukewarm to negative on the feature, with even most positive reviews comparing it negatively to its predecessor and the negative ones going extremely negative, with comparisons to the likes of widely despised touchstones for big-budget fail states like the Transformers films or Batman v Superman, characterizing the film as a stupid, shallow, one-dimensional, juvenile, devoid of compelling characters, empty, artistically unsound, plotless, little more than a set of FX set pieces and lightweight, old-school retro kaiju Godzilla movie fan service. Now, obviously, I'm on the other side of pretty much all of that, but my interest in this episode is more on the how we frame success, or the opposite, when it comes to these big event movies, and plus opinions are all subjective after all, and plenty of fellow critics I like and respect a lot didn't care for the film for thoughtful reasons, so I'm not super interested in turning this into some kind of here's why everyone but me is wrong about this movie episode. Well, okay, maybe just a little.
Okay, so look, yes, I gave this movie a 10 out of 10. No, the rating scale is not hard mathematics as far as I'm concerned, i.e. just because I think it's a perfect version of exactly what it wants to be, doesn't mean I think it's therefore the fucking Iliad, or that it belongs in the best picture race in a few months or something. Like, yeah, it's a great blockbuster, that doesn't mean it's Titanic or Black Panther or Lord of the Rings or whatever, so please settle down. That having been said, look, there's plenty of reasons for this not to be up your alley, but having seen the thing several times now, it's my considered take that if you're calling this a stupid movie, or even not especially a thoughtful film, you had to decide not to pay attention to it, because if there are two things this movie does not lack for other than big-ass monsters, it's characters and things on its mind. However, a lot of said things are either raised but not definitively answered, because they're more like grand esoteric questions about nature, existence, our place therein, where human characters have nuanced differences of opinion and there isn't an actual answer, or the data isn't spelled out explicitly in a spoon-fed fashion, because it relates to the 6 main characters who are gigantic animals that don't speak or have entirely unhuman-like emotional expressiveness. And yes, I did say 6 characters, because even though there's 4 titans, one of the things you'll notice if you actually watch the film is that the individual monsters all have extremely well-developed 3-dimensional characterizations conveyed entirely through non-verbal vocalization, physical movement, facial expression, musical accompaniment in some cases like Mothra, and scene direction conveying their individual arcs across the sweep of the film, meaning that the idea that there are no characters in this is a willful refusal to engage the basic language of the genre itself, and that the most obvious interesting example of this is that King Ghidorah's 3 heads all have individual character performances of their own. The center head is in charge and the smart one, the left is hyper alert and not necessarily cognitive, and the right one is dumb and distracted, always having to be yelled at or yanked back to attention by the others. So maybe you should consider that it's not too surprising that if you're being dismissive enough to say there were no characters because you just missed that the actual main characters weren't human actors delivering conventional spoken English performances, you also missed that this is also a darker, more consequential treatment of Malthusian ecological fatalist themes present in the Avengers movies through Thanos' storyline, or that its dual hero-villain main characters are a much more complex rendering of grief as irrational expression than fiction of this type is typically comfortable with, or that it manages the not difficult task of making its monster characters function equally well both as tangible metaphors, i.e. environmental climate disaster personified, and existential representations of the human character's interpersonal conflict writ large.
Okay, so maybe I had a little more to get off my chest there than I thought. Anyway, it's not as though more than little silly beat-em-ups about radioactive dinosaur gods are typically expected to be critical darlings in the first place, but the curiosity is that audiences, at least in the United States, weren't exactly compelled to turn out either. While it managed a first-place opening and has pulled mostly on-par box office for a film of its pedigree without an A-list human star in the lead, it actually opened significantly lower than its direct predecessor and the partly adjacent Kong Skull Island that came out between them, and while studios behind it are downplaying the soft opening, pointing to the already shooting Kong vs. Godzilla as a likely bigger hit, and the more robust overseas take as proof of sturdiness, that hasn't stopped a story-hungry entertainment press from running hard with over-the-top descriptions of the film as a dud or a bomb, not necessarily because it fits those descriptions in any conventional sense of how even Hollywood accounting works, but because it fits a currently popular Chicken Little narrative about franchise fatigue. As not only this, but sequels like The Secret Life of Pets 2 and Dark Phoenix are underperforming, and Men in Black International possibly is poised to do the same. What are they going to write about when Toy Story 4 and Spider-Man Far From Home likely do just fine? Don't worry, entertainment media's second favorite Sky is Falling story to write is audiences only go to Disney-branded things now, and soon that'll be all that's left. Oh no. Most of this, of course, is coming from the fact that our perception-based view of cultural success when it comes to the entertainment of this scale. If you don't open in first place as an absolutely massive smash hit, you're a failure, no middle ground, no room for distance performers because of the scoop-based mentality of box office reporting. It didn't used to be that way. Did you know that Ghostbusters and Gremlins both opened on the same day originally? It's true, and Ghostbusters came in first. You're probably not surprised by that. Today, both of those films are remembered as classics of their era and still move tons of product in re-released DVDs, digital downloads, and tie-in merchandise, and at the time, they were both seen as successful by legging it out in theaters steadily and building an audience. But today, Gremlins would probably get pegged as having been defeated for opening in second place, and that would have been that. Godzilla's salvation so far, apart from that it's doing merely okay and not Marvel-style dominant, is that it's doing much bigger business in China, and its main studio, Legendary Pictures, is a subsidiary of Chinese megacorporation Dylan Wanda, so those reported numbers are probably the real take-home in this case, which is not always true when it comes to exclusively American-financed film and their Chinese grosses, but that's another show. But the question remains, why wasn't the audience there for this to begin with? I think the main reason might be that for all its ubiquity, Godzilla, etc. are still not necessarily A-list properties with mainstream audiences, and really weren't before for the most part. You have to remember the history here. The reason dubbed Japanese monster movies were so widely known from the 60s up through the 90s to generations of Americans now making, starring in, and greenlighting big-budget Hollywood movies is that they were inexpensive to import, often available in multiple versions to different distributors, and made both perfect mid-tier drive-in fare and also off-hours TV filler aimed at kids. And American viewers got familiar with Godzilla mainly because he had the most sequels and was around the most. I recognize that pre-internet era of cultural presence being dictated less by actual demand than by the availability, and TV networks needing to fill space is difficult to imagine if you're under 25 and don't remember a world before YouTube, but that's how it was. Consider this, The Addams Family is a media franchise that got multiple live-action movies, cartoons, musicals, reboots, and a new animated film coming soon entirely based off being remembered by baby boomers and Generation Xers as a golden age of TV perennial, but the actual show only ran for 2 seasons back in the mid-60s. It stayed popular in the public imagination mainly because it was a syndicated rerun staple for decades. In other words, prior to these various attempts at big-budget reimaginings, Godzilla was always a well-known and heavily merchandised in the West, but the franchise was only widely known because of specific circumstances largely owed to it being inexpensive to widely distribute at a certain point. So the assumption that the audience must be there for Godzilla the same way it is for things like Batman or The Lion King is something of a leap if you stand back and look at the history. In many ways, it's still a niche property, and just as it took the right combination of circumstances and several failed attempts to get mainstream audiences to actually like Captain America, it's very possible that even though, as far as I'm concerned, King of the Monsters is basically the perfect version of itself, Warner Brothers and Legendary haven't found the precise alchemy to get audiences who aren't already all in on the brand on board yet. I hope they do, because I want a bunch more movies just like this, and not just because eventually it'll leave theaters and it'll be harder for me to go see it at least once a week. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.